What's up guys, I hope you like today's video. The first thing I'm doing here is just showing the fact that I went outside and collected some of these things. As I've mentioned, if you need something small, go outside and find a plant that's really small but looks really nice and then collect some moss. What we'll be using is silicone just to attach some of the rocks. I will be using cyacrylite glue, which I'll show later on. Got some dragon rock here or ochre stone. Obviously the plants and moss are collected outside, and here is the jar I'll be using. It's really not as big as it looks though. It's actually only just a little candle jar, as I've mentioned. All I did was I just got the wax out, or the excess wax, once we'd used it fully, and then left boiling water in, tipped the rest out, and that was it, just cracked on. First thing I did do though was just sort of put the rocks in different shapes and sizes, see how I wanted them to lay. It was tough because obviously they keep toppling over while you're doing it, but just get a rough idea on which ones go well where. And then I started to silicone the back of the rocks and just attach them, and then put as you can see here, I'm just sort of putting the beads in between the little bits and then filling them in with smaller little pieces of rock just to fill in those gaps of where you'll see that silicone. I can actually hide the rest of that silicone seal using sphagnum moss and just moss laid on top of the sphagnum moss. So regardless, all of the silicone and any of the sort of, you know, ugly DIY stuff that I do, it will be hidden once, you know, the final thing is done and I get all of the moss in. I did leave this for 24 hours once I'd got the size and shape of what I wanted it to be. But you can see me here just putting the bits of rock onto those little silicone sealed parts. And once I'd done all of that, I added some little bits of dust, or like sort of ochre stone dust, which I just smashed up some rocks to get. I did all of that, filled in those little tiny gaps there you can see, and then essentially left it for 24 hours. Then the next day, what I did was just washed all of that excess dust off, anything like that. Got all of the little bits of debris out, cleaned the glass again, and then just cracked on with the next process, which was adding the sphagnum moss, adding the moss. I ended up actually not using any sphagnum moss. What I did was I just layered moss on top of moss, and used some of the, what we'll say is worse looking moss, and put the nice moss on top of that to layer it and add as sort of like a wet blanket, like you would if you were going to use fibre or line or anything like that to keep it moist. Luckily, with water being sat in here, it will wick up through, and I will be wrapping it up in cling film, so for the first initial couple of weeks, just to keep it you know, nice and humid inside for the moss. But this is me. What I did is I added some sand from my mountain paludarium. That's just because it seeds, or it has loads of biological bacteria inside the soil already, the sand. So to me, adding that in there was a no-brainer. I only needed literally like the smallest handful in the world, because it's obviously quite small, the jar itself. So I added in 2 or 3, you know, spoonfuls of sand in there. You notice that there was actually something in the bottom of the jar there, and I didn't notice until I'd put it up later on, but during the time lapse you see it move in the water section a little bit, but it's actually a scud, because I got all of this from the pond in my father's back garden, all of this moss. Afterwards I noticed there was scuds attached to the moss, and some of them were inside the obviously inside the water straight from that pond. So I've got a couple of scuds in there. What I will be doing though is getting a few more and adding them in, and I will have a sort of little scud population there, and we'll just see how they do. So this is where I'd sort of put the base layer down, and then what I need to be doing now was adding the nicer moss on top of this, or different variations of moss, different types of moss, in hope that obviously it'll brighten it up a little bit. But I am liking the initial sort of lay down of the moss, the plants, things like that. I like the that little one I showed at the intro, which essentially it looks like jungle vines, that sort of thing, which I think adds a nice texture. it did go a little bit murky from all of the moss, obviously, that I added in. Some soil dropped in, and when I was spraying it down, obviously, again, some soil and moss may have dropped into the water. So what I'll be doing is taking out that water, replacing it just so it's a little bit clearer. It will eventually settle down after a few weeks, but at this initial stage, I just wanted to make sure that it was nice, you know, for the final photos, so you can see what it will look like. The regret I have is that I wish I added a little tiny filter or something to the back, incorporated that within the design and hid it. Either way, what I will have to do is obviously change that water every about 3 days, 2 or 3 days, but at first I'll be changing it every day for the first 2 weeks. But either way, the sand, as I've mentioned, has a lot of biological you know, filtration or biological startup bacteria, we'll say. It has a lot of startup bacteria inside there already. This is the cling film I add to the top, and I wrapped it up like this for a couple of weeks just to keep that humidity inside initially. But with that water, as I've mentioned, it will wick up and generally it should be okay. But if you like the video, remember to smash that like button for me. And as always, you know, hit that notification icon, subscribe to the channel if you already aren't subscribed to the channel. And if you want to see more videos like this, then just let me know. I'm more than happy to, you know, do what you've suggested in the comments. So make sure you do suggest a few things. What we'll do though is I'll transfer it to the other room where the lighting's a little bit better. I'll show you that scud, and we'll get the final shot with the nicest moss on the top. And yeah, but as always from me, guys, peace and love. I'm out.